Just use the word said when you write dialogue, please. Today I'm going to list 5 tips that I wish I could give myself 10 years ago. These are things that I really should have heard back when I was about 17, 18 years old and writing some stories that would never ever see the light of day. So 5 tips that I wish I'd heard 10 years ago and that hopefully are going to help you out where you are right now. I'm actually going to start with what I think is the best advice that I can give instead of waiting until the very last one, because I'm just generous like that. Write your first million words. This is something that you're going to hear pretty often, I think. I've heard it a couple of times, and it is so incredibly true. Writing is not a talent. Anybody who tells you that writing is a talent, they're wrong. It's not something you're born with. It's not something that is natural. It is something that is a skill that you hone over time and through practice. Now, some people may be able to improve the craft of writing more quickly than others, but it is ultimately a skill that you have to hone, and it takes a lot of practice. And most of the time, you aren't really going to notice a significant improvement in your writing and be ready to start publishing your books out into the world until you've written roughly your first million words. And now I know that might sound like a daunting number. A million words is a lot. That is The Storm of Swords by George R. R. Martin twice. You need to write that book 2 times. Don't go and just rewrite that book twice and think that that makes you a great writer. That's not what I'm talking about here. But how you should think about it is that this is going to span across every single project, even projects that you don't finish. If you start a book and you just write the first draft of that book, or you only get halfway through the first draft before you scrap it, those words that you wrote still count. You still improved the craft of writing, and there is a reason why you decided to scrap that project. You got better by the time you got to the point where you're like, I'm done with this, I'm gonna move on to something else now. You were improving through writing it, and so those words count. I don't mean that you need to write and finish enough stories to total up to 1 million words. You just need to write 1 million words in trying to write a story. That doesn't mean just go and write the word, I don't know, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious 1 million times and then you're gonna be a fantastic writer by the end of that. This means you need to try to write books, and by the time you have written a total of 1 million words in these attempts, your ability to write will have improved greatly, and it can take a while to get to that point. I don't think that I got to my first 1 million words until I was roughly 19 or so, and I wrote a lot from the ages of about 5 or 6 all the way up until now. I was writing constantly. I always had a book or project I was working on in some way. By the time I'd reached roughly 1 million words, that's when I wrote Edwin, which is the first thing I wrote that actually received an award. That first 1 million words thing, it's pretty true. There's a lot of truth to that, and I definitely recommend that you as a writer, if you have written, I don't know, the 3 or 4 books that you've scrapped and you're starting to think, I can't make it, how many words have you written, and how have you improved since the first few words that you wrote in that first project that you scrapped? You have probably gotten a lot better over the course of all these projects, even if none of them have seen the light of day. And with that, I'm gonna move on to tip number 2. Use the word said. Tip number 3. Okay, I'll expand on that a little bit more. Just use the word said when you write dialogue. Please. Anything else is going to feel like horrible fan fiction. And what I mean by that is, in fan fiction writing, you tend to find writers who constantly feel the need to use a dialogue tag besides said. They feel like if they use said more than once in a conversation, that it just means that they aren't creative. So they start tossing in a ton of other dialogue tags. Grumbled, whispered, shouted, declared, bellowed, over and over again, just constantly. And you know what? Those words do have their place. Sometimes in a dialogue scene, you need to emphasize how something is said, but most of the time it doesn't need to happen, and all it does is make it sound like this person is constantly changing the tone of the discussion with every single sentence. And when you have grumbled and bellowed and shouted and whispered and I don't know, take one from J.K. Rowling's book and say ejaculated. When you have all of these words and you are just spewing them onto the page, it is extremely distracting for the reader. But do you know what isn't distracting because we just kind of gloss over the word during dialogue? The word said. The only reason that you're even really going to recognize the word said was written in the book is if you are reading out loud. To that point as well, sometimes you don't even need to use the word said. You can get away with not having any dialogue tags at all.
It's not true. That's impossible!
And this can greatly improve the flow of the dialogue overall. You want to avoid having actual talking heads where you just have a constant stream of dialogue and kind of expect the reader to follow along with it. But it is entirely possible in many situations, especially one-on-one conversations, to not have dialogue tags for every single sentence in the dialogue. That is my second piece of advice. Just use the word said. It's okay. Seriously. Use the word said. Please. It will improve things so much and will make reading your work a lot easier. And speaking of reading your work, my third tip is read, but not your work. Just books. Read books, and read books from more than one author and in more than one genre. You don't even have to read books in the genre that you're trying to write in. In fact, I strongly recommend broadening your horizons. You're going to be able to bring a lot more to your genre if you are well read in many others. You can even bring things from non-fictional books into fiction. You can learn things from the way that people write non-fiction books. And if you only read one author, you're going to end up sounding like a crude imitation of that author, especially if it is somebody who is popular. Terry Pratchett is my absolute favorite author of all time. Now imagine if I only ever read Terry Pratchett books. One, this channel might not be all that interesting. I feel like it's interesting. I mean, you know, myself and 24 other people agree that this channel is interesting, so I'm just gonna throw that out there. That's a lot of people. Anyway, we think it's interesting. It would be significantly less interesting, and there'd probably only be like 9 other people if I only ever talked about Terry Pratchett's books, because that was all I'd ever read. And I definitely would not have the experience to look at books through a critical lens. But worse than all of that, my writing would sound like I was trying to be Terry Pratchett, because that's all that I'd ever really read. And so it would just sound like a sort of half-hearted attempt to be Terry Pratchett, even if I'm not consciously doing that. Because while you are reading a lot and you are reading books from many different authors, you are kind of subconsciously pulling in some of their styles and some information about how they write. Especially if you're looking at it as somebody who wants to write books and has tried to write books, you're gonna start just kind of subconsciously taking some things in. How do they handle dialogue? How do they handle combat? How do they decide when they break up chapters? You're gonna start learning a lot, and by the time that you have finished reading several different authors, your own authorial voice will have developed just a little bit more. You definitely want to make sure you find your own unique voice, because if you sound like everybody else on the market, there's nothing to really sell yourself or your books. You don't want to sound like the other authors who are really popular. What was I saying? I got off on an aliens tangent. I'm not even trying to talk about aliens. I don't need a xenomorph reading Harry Potter. What was I talking about? Oh, right. This 4th tip is actually drawn from my own personal experience. This is what tipped me over from being a writer who only ever shared his works with friends and family to being a writer who received an award and started publishing. And that piece of advice is going to be explore deeply human topics and ideas. This is so critical, and it is really what helped me out and what helped my writing start to flourish. I really only wrote stories that were about myself. Essentially, I did a lot of self-inserting when I was younger, or inserting people that I did or didn't like in my real life and would just pile all of them in there. And I just really explored ideas that I already had my own mind made up about. I didn't learn anything about the world or about people through the process of writing, and ultimately nothing was ever really achieved by the time that I finished a book. So what I started doing, and this has really just worked for me, is I thought of an idea that I wanted to explore, something I did not know and wanted to figure out. Now, it could be something in myself, it could be a mystery that I personally held, like trying to navigate things such as loneliness or love or that sort of thing. I would take that sort of question and think, this is an idea or a topic that I want to explore and try to figure out. And then I would do a combination of research and drafting that would ultimately allow me to explore those concepts. And with the book Edwin, which won me my first award, the concept I really wanted to explore was a little complicated to try to explain, but essentially it was about isolation despite having a family unit. I mean, he was married and he had a daughter, but he was incredibly and horribly alone and very overwhelmed by having to take care of his family. And these are just some ideas that I really wanted to explore. I did research, I wrote a couple of different drafts, and I really just wanted to explore this idea and show raw human emotions. Now, you don't have to just explore human emotions in these. Just explore something you yourself want to figure out, or perhaps you want to help your reader figure out, as the case may be. Just make sure you're actually accomplishing something with your writing and not just vomiting a bunch of words onto a page that ultimately are going to mean nothing and aren't going to resonate with anybody. Now, this doesn't mean that your writing always has to be something that's going to change the world or change someone's heart or change somebody's mind. But I just think that for me personally, my best writing and my best stories have come out of me thinking, I don't know the answer to this question, so I'm going to write a story that explores this question, and maybe I'll figure out the answer through the process of writing. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I think it makes sense. That is my 4th tip. It is something that I have found is really helpful, and it's improved not only my writing, but myself as a person. It has allowed me to empathize a lot more. And I think that my stories have improved greatly since I started using writing as a way to explore things that I don't fully understand. Now, before I get into the 5th tip that I have, I just wanted to let you know that you can like, comment, and subscribe all without paying any money, except for whatever your internet costs for those like 2 seconds. But I would really appreciate it if you'll consider doing that. It really helps me out as I try to grow the this channel. And again, just thank you for taking the time to do that. Oh wait, it's okay. Don't worry, you can scroll down there. What's it look like down there? You done? Did you like, comment, and subscribe? Okay, now we can get on to the fifth tip. And the fifth tip is going to be no wish fulfillment, as in none. Stop it.
Stop it. Get some help.
I know how tempting it is as a writer early on to pursue wish fulfillment through your writing. But here's the thing, when you are trying to turn your writing into your own personal escape and your own way to create a reality that conforms to your own will, you're not really doing anybody any favors. One, you're not doing yourself any favors because you are escaping from reality in a way that ultimately is not going to be healthy and that doesn't actually help you work through any of these problems, because when you're doing wish fulfillment, you're essentially saying, this is how I want things to be, and so in this reality, this is how things are. You're not actually exploring any genuine consequences, and there are consequences for these things. I used writing as a form of escape for a long time, and it wasn't until I started doing kind of the opposite of wish fulfillment and did more of a darker take on that, which kind of goes in conjunction with what my previous tip was, and that was me thinking, okay, this is what I wish would happen. This is what I think the world should be like. Now, let me think about the darker side of this. What are the actual consequences that would happen if I got my way in this instant? What does it say about me as a person that I want this to be what happens? This improved, again, not just my writing, but me. And I am so glad that I started doing that, because my writing got so much better and it became a lot more relatable to people. Because if you're doing a wish fulfillment book, it reads like escapism. Like, you can tell reading a book like that, this is an author who is very full of themselves or who feels like it's my way or the highway, and they're writing a book that is really just them trying to escape into their own reality. Instead, do what my fourth tip was and explore some ideas that you don't fully understand or some concepts. When you do that, when you stop writing books that are just wish fulfillment, you're going to have a lot more appeal and you're going to be a lot more proud of the books by the time that you have finished writing them, instead of looking at it once you're done and thinking, this is terrible, I hate this. So if your writing really qualifies as wish fulfillment, it's time to stop. It's time for you to grow up as a writer and as a person, move on and start exploring some ideas that aren't just self-gratification. Was that harsh? I don't care, it should be harsh. And if I could go back in time and talk to myself when I was 16 or 17 about some of the stuff I was writing, I would be pretty harsh with myself as well. I needed it. Even if you're like in the middle of a book and it's wish fulfillment, you can stop writing that book now and go write something else. Okay. That's all I had. And those are the 5 things that I wish I could go back in time and tell myself a decade ago. I think it would have improved my writing a lot more quickly, and I would be a lot more proud of some of the things that I've written over the last 10 years or so. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out this video. I really appreciate it, and really appreciate you liking, commenting, and subscribing. If you'd like to see another video from me, you can click up here. And until next time, bye. Cord is stuck.